Today, we're going to jump into something pretty amazing. It's a journey into a vibrant, centuries-long debate about reason, faith, and reality that unfolded within the Muslim world. Honestly, it's a history of intense intellectual wrestling that you might not expect at all.
You've probably heard some version of this before, right? For centuries, critiques like these have been leveled against Islam. They paint this picture of a faith that's fundamentally against any kind of deep thinking, a religion where the only thing that matters is blind obedience.
But is that really the whole story? I mean, is it even close? Because hiding behind these common ideas is a tradition of fierce, brilliant philosophical debate that's literally as old as the religion itself. So let's start at the very beginning.
See, the thing is, far from demanding blind faith, the earliest Muslim communities found themselves grappling with some profound questions right away. Just the act of trying to interpret their foundational texts, the Quran, and the sayings of the Prophet, it sparked immediate and intense intellectual debate. A great scholar named Shahrastani later looked back and basically identified what he called the four great problems that were at the heart of all these discussions. And look at these: free will versus predestination, the very nature of God, the link between faith and your actions, and that huge one, the clash between reason and revelation. These are the fundamental questions that thinkers would argue about for 1,000 years. And to tackle these massive problems, they didn't just guess. They developed some really sophisticated intellectual tools. One of the most important was qiyas, which is basically a knowledgeable reasoning. This wasn't about blind belief, it was a system. So when a new problem popped up that wasn't explicitly covered in the texts, scholars would search for parallels, for precedents, to reason their way to a solution. It was a structured, rational approach right from the get-go.
Okay, so out of all those early debates, one central conflict eventually came to define Muslim philosophy for centuries, and that's the tension between pure, raw reason on one side and divine revelation on the other. This whole drama played out through two major, and I mean opposing schools of thought.
So on one side, you had the Mu'tazila. You can think of them as the hardcore rationalists. Their school was famously founded when a student named Wasil bin Atta had a major disagreement with his teacher over a really fine point of theology. So what did he do? He literally withdrew from his teacher's circle to start his own, and his whole thing was championing reason as the ultimate final judge of all truth. And in response, the Ash'ari school emerged. Now, the irony here is that its founder, Al-Ash'ari, was a star student of the Mu'tazila himself, but after his own famous debate with his teacher, he broke away. He wasn't against reason, not at all, but he believed it had to work in service of revelation. His whole goal was to create this powerful synthesis, a middle path between pure logic and just taking things literally. Okay, this slide really boils down their epic debates into just a few points. For the Mu'tazila, the rationalists, they said if the Quran was eternal just like God, well then you'd have two eternal beings, and that completely messes with pure monotheism. So they concluded the Quran had to be created. The Ash'ari fired back, saying God's word has to be part of his eternal nature. Then on justice, the Mu'tazila argued that a perfectly good God is basically obligated to be just. The Ash'ari responded, no way. Nothing can obligate God. His will is absolute. You can just imagine the arguments. These were the intellectual battlegrounds for centuries.
And believe me, these debates could get personal and incredibly clever. There was this one rationalist leader who argued that God's attributes, like his knowledge, were the same thing as his essence. In other words, God is his knowledge. Well, Al-Ash'ari, the founder of the rival school, supposedly shot back that if that's true, then instead of praying, "Oh God, forgive me," the man should pray, "Oh knowledge, forgive me," which is just a brilliant, witty way to show the absurd conclusion of his opponent's logic.
But here's where it gets even cooler. This incredible intellectual energy, it wasn't just stuck in theology. Nope. It spilled over, fueling a golden age where philosophy expanded to touch every single field of human knowledge. And it produced some of the world's most influential thinkers, period.
Over in Cordoba, Spain, you had Ibn Rushd, who the West called Averroes. This guy was so dedicated to the Greek philosopher Aristotle that he wrote these super detailed commentaries on pretty much all of his works. And it was largely through Ibn Rushd's meticulous work that Aristotle's logic was rediscovered by medieval Europe, which helped spark the Renaissance. A true game changer. But the rationalists didn't go unchallenged, not by a long shot. Al-Ghazali, who was just one of the most brilliant minds of his time,
launched this devastating critique called the incoherence of the philosophers. He basically argued that pure reason has its limits, and it can lead you down a rabbit hole of contradiction and doubt. And after a profound personal crisis, he turned away from philosophy and towards Sufism, Islamic mysticism, because he was looking for a more direct, an experiential knowledge of God.
And then there was Ibn Khaldun. Wow, this guy wasn't just a philosopher. He was arguably the world's first sociologist. He looked at history not as some story of kings and battles, but as a science with social laws. He came up with this concept of asabiyya, which is kind of like social cohesion or group solidarity, and he argued that this bond was the engine that powered civilizations to rise, and the loss of it was what inevitably caused them to fall. Just incredible stuff.
And this, right here, this brilliantly illustrates how nuanced the debate was, even among these absolute giants. So you have Ibn Rushd, the ultimate fan of Aristotle, who saw formal logic as the most essential tool for finding truth. But then you have Ibn Khaldun, who was a lot more skeptical. He thought, sure, logic is useful, but he warned that if it's not grounded in real-world observation and experience, it's just an empty game that can make a scholar sound clever, but not actually wise.
Now, you might be thinking this intense conversation just kind of fizzled out with the Golden Age, but that's not what happened at all. It's a living tradition. As the world changed, new thinkers emerged who just kept the conversation going, debating, reforming, and reinterpreting their faith for new times and new challenges. So fast forward to the 19th and 20th centuries. You've got the rise of European colonialism, modern science is taking off, and these reformers argued for a total renewal of Islamic thought. You had Syed Ahmed Khan insisting that the Quran wasn't an obstacle to science, it actually encouraged it. Mahdi Ali championed education as the cure for superstition, and Syed Amir Ali called for Muslims to ditch passive fatalism and embrace a dynamic, active faith. This quote from Syed Amir Ali, it just perfectly captures the spirit of these modern reformers. Their core message was that any conflict people saw between Islam and the modern world wasn't actually inherent to the religion. Instead, it was the result of centuries of human interpretations, cultural habits, and a loss of that dynamic, intellectual spirit of their ancestors. So here's the crucial point. When you lay it all out like this, you see this was never, ever a story of blind faith. It's a continuous 1,400-year conversation. It started with the earliest theological disputes, evolved with the great rationalists, was synthesized with revelation, absolutely exploded into a golden age of science, and it continues today with calls for modern reform. Intellectual debate has always been the constant. We started with that common criticism, right? That Islam leaves no room for free thought. But what we've seen is this long, powerful, incredible history of exactly that. And that leaves us with a final and, I think, pretty provocative thought. If this entire intellectual tradition can be so widely overlooked, what else about our shared history have we gotten wrong? What other complex stories have been flattened into simple, easy stereotypes? Now that's something we're thinking about.